Hi, everyone, and thank you for attending today's webinar, Driving HR Transformation with AI Agents, Operationalizing Agentic AI in Real-World Use Cases for Measurable Impact. My name is Frances Grimaldo, and I'll be your moderator for today. I'm joined by Martin Colyer, Innovation and AI Strategy Director at Lace Partners, and Kashif Mahbub, CMO at Aisera. I'm also joined by Joanna Swartwood, Director of Growth Marketing at Aisera, who will be running our slides. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us. As a reminder, this is a live Q&A, so please feel free to put any questions in the chat, and we'll be happy to answer them throughout today's session. Next slide, please. To give a brief introduction, Lace Partners is one of the UK's most trusted HR consultancies, with over a decade's worth of success in workforce, experience, and payroll solutions. The company works with CIOs and CHROs across all industries to deliver transformation success, simplify the HR tech landscape, and enable AI value. They're trusted by FTSE 100, S&P 500, and NASDAQ customers, and were recognized as one of the best places to work. Next slide, please. Aisera enables businesses to deliver transformative work experiences, boost employee productivity, and reduce operational costs with its AI agent platform. The company has been recognized as a leader in the market by top industry analysts including Gartner, Forrester, and IDC. Aisera is backed by top-tier investors such as Goldman Sachs, Menlo Ventures, True Ventures, and more, and serves Fortune 500 enterprises including Aramark, Gilead, Workday, and Adobe, just to name a few. Next slide. Aisera is committed to delivering AI agents that transform people operations across HR, and they also deliver AI agents for IT, finance, and many other domains. Now, what is an AI agent? AI agents understand, reason, and take action on user requests. They're intelligent assistants that understand your employees' needs, access information across your various apps and systems, and complete tasks on their own. What sets agentic AI apart from traditional automation is that it combines expert knowledge with autonomous action. It'll parse the employee's request, including any industry-specific terms, and executes complex multi-step workflows across all your different apps, just like your seasoned HR professionals would. For example, here we have an employee who is transferring to a different office. The AI agent creates an onboarding checklist that's personalized to her needs. It also allows her to complete tasks within the interface and answers any questions that she has, which reduces manual effort on her part. Now, Martin, HR leaders are under pressure to modernize their operations and improve the employee experience while staying agile and keeping the costs low. From what you're seeing with your HR clients, what makes AI agents compelling for addressing some of these challenges?
Yeah, thank you. It's such we're in such a period of change at the moment that many clients are just trying to figure out where the opportunities are. So certainly, through the example that you're giving here, then there's great opportunities in efficiency and smoothing out processes that might otherwise not necessarily have been the most effective or efficient. But equally beyond that, it's the personalization. So it's giving people the ability to, and employees the ability to have something that meets their needs more specifically, and something that I'm sure we'll go on to talk about later, but it helps the adoption. And as we know from any investment in any form of technology, then the way that is really realized is through the adoption. So again, it's really around the opportunities. The other one, just very briefly, is that also from an HR and HR professionals perspective, is giving, again, an opportunity to look at what your operating model is and actually the work that's then getting done within that operating model, because that's sort of the flow with which you would look at how an agent would fit within that operating model, the processes, and very specifically the work that you're looking to complete and support your HR teams and your employees, importantly.
Yes, thanks for that insight, Martin. And just going a little bit further with that, according to Gartner, the number of HR leaders who are implementing AI is steadily increasing. Next slide, please. 61% of HR leaders are actually in the later stages of AI implementation. What would you say are some of the biggest challenges that you see your HR clients encountering during this implementation process?
Well, I think certainly the technology is improving at such a speed that it's often the internal organizational factors that are the ones that need to be focused on. So it's maybe not always being clear on some of the specific use cases and what the success criteria of those use cases are. It can be things like, have you got the data, if your data in the right place, and in any of the sort of process rework that you've been trying to do with your sort of core and traditional HR technology. I guess within that, then it's really considering what the legacy of some of the technology is that you've got. So it's trying to bring all of these pieces together, but being very clear on why you're doing it and being very clear on those use cases.
Yes, legacy systems can definitely be a big part of organizations who are looking to modernize their HR processes, especially when it represents a long span of effort of improving the HR processes overall. Martin, what do you think that a full rip and replace would mean for an organization?
Well, often one of the biggest things is just how disruptive it is, because often these solutions, they're often core to the way a business and an HR team operates. And in doing so, if you were to completely rip that out, then the disruption and the complexity sometimes of doing that is really noticeable. So it's certainly not something to be taken lightly, because often if it's been a multi-year period to implement it in the first place, then actually it can be a multi-year period to look at what the implications are of replacing it as well. So beginning to look at all the things, some of those complexities around the original data migration, all of the requirements that went into them, joining all of those things together across your architecture, and then not only retraining all of your employees and your users across the implementation and your post go live period, then it's you've got a real sort of really significant consideration as to what that full rip and replace would look like. So certainly you can see where the opportunities of using agents and agentic capability can start to bridge some of that sort of decision making, because again, the cost of those things can just be really, really prohibitive.
Yes, and with that disruptive process, do you find that most clients lean one way or another towards the build versus buy when they're implementing AI agents into their systems?
I, it certainly can be very dependent, and I can see out into the future that there's going to be sort of a blend, but it doesn't come without the sort of considerations that you need to be looking at. Is to say, with the sort of builds, you're often looking at things that are very more specific and might be very, very prescriptive to you as a business, but actually within that, then the difficulties become in maintenance of it, the upgrade, the upkeep, and being able to manage those out into the future, as opposed to when you're buying something. Obviously it's far more and often quicker to implement. You've got the ability then to take advantage of the agents and the nature of the roadmaps that come with agents and how those agents are being built, and obviously the platforms within they sit in. So it's looking across those, and equally how you can then leverage multiple agents, and equally how you can implement those into your broader systems and technology as well. So it comes back to what's that potential opportunity of having some of the, as I went back to one of my early points around personalization, that with buying you often have more of that single pane of glass type concept, which we can increasingly see agents supporting.
And Kashif, I'd also love to get your thoughts on what are some of the key considerations organizations should keep in mind when they're implementing their AI agent systems? And would a complete rip and replace be necessary, or is there a way to plug AI agents into the enterprise seamlessly?
No, thank you. The rip and replace is an approach that is dated, that is highly disruptive, and really needs to be thought through. So let's take a step back. It's been almost exactly, today is November 11th. It's been almost exactly 3 years ago that ChatGPT was launched. And with that, a lot of things have changed. Now we all have in our phones, in our daily systems, in our browsers, a window open asking, whether you use ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini or any of these Gen AI systems, generative AI systems. A lot has changed. on a personal level and a productivity for employees level, but we all can take it all for granted that pretty much everybody in your organization is using some form of a generative AI-driven assistant, right? So just to give you an idea, ChatGPT today has about 1 billion users across the globe. So think of essentially, it's a given that every organization, every employee is using some form of assistant. Now, on the other side, legacy systems, we can call them that, but enterprise infrastructure has been there for 30 plus years, has been developing over 30 plus years, right? So two completely different things are happening. And my analogy usually is when, if you all remember when iPhone came out, IT folks had, really were pushing back to stop it from getting integrated into IT systems, corporate environments, because it was hard. But people started showing up with their own devices. So eventually it had to be brought in. And that's what pretty much killed BlackBerry. So ChatGPT, Claude, any type of these assistants are given today. We know employees are using them. Everybody's using them, not just employees. On the other hand, they need to be secure, to be productive, to not be breaking HR and IT policies. They need to be integrated into the systems. And so we are all, as enterprises, CIOs and their offices are going through that process today. Coming back to the question of rip and replace, that means that there is already a movement happening thanks to the very rapid evolution and adoption of ChatGPT type, assistants, of how to integrate these assistants into the systems, into the running infrastructures of global enterprises today. So the data on the screen is not surprising. This has been a very fast adoption, especially by HR leaders who constantly deal with onboarding new employees, offboarding folks who are leaving, providing services, answering questions, everything that comes with having employees. And so you have two different worlds coming together. CIOs are sitting in the middle, managing 800 to 1,000 platforms in a typical large Fortune 500 enterprise. And so going in from Aisera's point of view, we are a vendor of AI and innovations in AI, and especially agentic AI. Going in and saying, I'm going to rip and replace your 30-year-old systems that you've invested tens of millions of dollars integrating, building data into, building knowledge into, and all of that is just a no-go. It's a non-starter. And even when you can convince somebody to do that, the disruption cost for employees on a day-to-day basis is highly cost efficient more than anything else. So what's the answer here? The answer here is what Martin mentioned, a single pane of glass approach to agents coming in, whether it's HR, IT, customer support, legal, finance, procurement, sales, marketing, you name it. These are all the domains that are constantly using these agents. So I think the simple answer is it's a work in progress. The approach is not to go rip and replace, but to be able to work with existing systems so that the complex existing infrastructures and environments don't get disrupted and show value very, very quickly. And we'll get to the value part in a few minutes. But that's super critical from any perspective to show quick value, and then know that this is a long-term approach of really a transformation across the enterprise.
Thank you for that. And just kind of following up with that point about integrating new systems. Next slide, please. So how would you say that implementing a universal agentic layer would help organizations operationalize agentic AI?
So agentic AI, should be thought of as another approach to how work gets done today. AI is now at a point where it can answer and take care of a lot of the ground level questions we all deal with on a day-to-day basis as employees in our companies, as workers in our companies. So what you see on screen is on the left, you have the employees, and on the right, you have the service desk. It could be an IT service desk, it could be an HR service desk, it could be finance, procurement, legal. These are the folks sitting there answering questions. So if I get locked out of my email, or if I want to have some answers about my retirement plan, or can I take a family leave, an extended family leave, I send a question over to the service desk, my HR manager or my IT manager, and so forth. So those are two worlds that pretty much live within every enterprise, big or small, today. And the bigger the enterprise, the more complex the scenario is. So from left, you will see on a daily basis hundreds, if not thousands and tens of thousands of queries going towards the service desk. And so the load on the service desk is enormous, but on the other side, the employees have to get work done. If I get locked out of my email today, my day is gonna come to a halt until that email is working, or until Slack is working, or Microsoft Teams is working, and all of that. And so agentic approach has to be a self-learning system. So in this case, at the bottom, you see the enterprise infrastructure. Especially if you look at it on the left side, you have all the HRIS systems. You have the Workdays of the world rippling, and all the new tools, applications, and platforms that are there, and there are a plethora of them, right? And then on the right side, you see all the enterprise data systems, document systems, other applications running. That is what the CIO's office is managing on a day-to-day basis. And there are specific applications for each of the domains that you see, IT and HR and so forth. And so on top of that, an agentic layer means, going back to Martin's point about a single pane of glass, that is the ideal here, is that agents that can learn and connect into and integrate into our existing enterprise infrastructures, glean the information out of there, and then address 70, 80, 90% of those questions that employees are asking. Where can I find my retirement plan? What is, like I said, my family leave policy? I'm locked out of my email. I cannot, I need a license to Adobe software, for example. A plethora of those questions, majority of those should and can be answered today by AI agents. You do not need humans answering those questions. Things like getting your email back, is sending a two-factor authentication link, going through that entire process. So and on the right side, that means that if we get 80% of those deflected, quote unquote deflected, meaning resolved automatically without human involvement, then only 20%, 10%, 15% are getting to the service desk. That does two things. Employee productivity, first of all, goes up. We've seen as much as 50 to 60% improvement. We'll talk about that a little bit later in a customer scenario. And number two, cost efficiencies. You actually are saving business hours. People are working, they're producing their work, and that's where cost efficiencies come in. And then last but not the least is satisfaction of the employees on both sides of the aisle, on the service desk side and also on the employee side. So it's a deflect, learn, improve. With every cycle of this loop, the system improves, the agent learns more. Of course, it all starts with integrating with those and understanding those environments. We can call them legacy systems, not a derogative term at all, derogative term at all. It is a scenario that every enterprise is dealing with today.
Thank you so much, Kashif. And Martin, what do you see the impact of this kind of layer that spans across the entire organization, across HR processes, and how they get work done overall?
Yeah, I mean, it's building on a number of those points. So I think where we've got, and it comes back to the opportunities and also the technology now being in a position to support some of the potential that we've been talking about for so long. So that single pane, I think, it has a few functions. The first is that it brings the personalization, it brings the experience into a single point. One of the things that we've all suffered with for quite a long time, a very long time, has been these multi-points solutions, multi-points of entry, a confusing landscape for employees to engage with, and in turn, then often a dropout of adoption. And to some of the points around, calls coming in and tickets being raised, it's often because it wasn't often clear, or a lack of understanding or lack of skills in terms of completing. So I think that single pane is something that begins to focus the ability to personalize the experience and to drastically improve that experience for employees and for HR teams in this instance to actually get their work done. The other is then, well, underneath it, what we've had is often quite a messy landscape of data and processes as well. So it gives the ability to start rewiring some of those processes more efficiently and do it in a way that means, and going back to some of the previous points around ripping and replacing, well, in the old world, that was largely the only way that you can do it without actually adding on to where we've got to now in many organizations, where there's so many different solutions often cover similar pieces of functionality or capability. And in reality, if we could bring those out via agents, then it would give us the opportunity to start rationalizing some of the underpinning ecosystems and architecture that really, many of the CIOs that we speak to have been dying to do for many years. So there's an opportunity in rationalizing the data and the process, and then really starting to look at what that means for the enterprise technology that sits underneath it.
Yeah.
And I guess one of the final ones, just very, very quickly, one of the final pieces in there as well is the opportunity on actually beginning to leapfrog with some of the technology where you would have had to do that rewiring in order to start to take on new capability. Actually, there's an opportunity here to almost go through that leapfrog process and start to look out into the future, and because the opportunity is here now.
Yeah, indeed. One of the questions that we, from Aisera's perspective, we see all the time, all these logos that we see at the bottom, pretty much every company has launched its own agents. So what do you do as a CIO when every single platform has its own agents? And those are native agents, and everybody's claiming that my agent is going to take care of everything across the board. And so it's a very interesting point in time, back to that single pane of glass. Easy to talk about it, quite complex to get to, because you have to maintain your large systems of record like Workday and Salesforce and ServiceNow and so forth, based on the specific tasks, whether it's a CRM or ITSM or HRIS systems. Interesting times. We are seeing various different approaches being taken, but one thing is for sure, that if we go in as a new technology provider and we say this system that you have could be HRIS, could be ITSM, could be something else, that's been sitting there for 30 plus years or 20 plus years, has developed a knowledge base of its own. There's a lot of knowledge sitting in there, and we go in and say, I'm going to take over all that knowledge. You don't need that anymore. It just does not fly. It is just extremely difficult for an enterprise to switch over overnight. Instead, I think the approach that we've seen work really well is, so I'll give you an example. We were talking about the ticket deflection here. Somebody's asking for, parental leave. An agent comes in, answers that question based on a policy. Now that is a knowledge article that agent can auto-generate and put it back into the database, so that next time it's not even an agent asking, you actually will have that information available in that knowledge base. And so the loop is important here. So this closed loop agentic system means that this is a learning loop which generates these knowledge articles. We also look at a clustering of these requests. So if we certainly start getting a lot of requests about, family leave, we can go in as HR operators and check, why is that happening? Is it because of a recent change in regulations and policy across the, country, maybe? And so there are lots of mitigating factors where agentic can be really helpful, which gets missed often, because we all talk about, getting stuff done with agents. The knowledge part of it is also critically important, especially for the HR leaders, where there's policies, there are, always help needed by employees. So I just wanted to bring up that point as to knowledge generation and knowledge delivery is very much in the realm of agentic AI as well going forward. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that definitely with HR policies affecting people's everyday processes, I wanted to get more into the adoption piece, which next slide, by the way. I'd like to get more into talking about adoption and making sure that people actually use these new systems that have been implemented in the organization. So Martin, if these types of agents can make changes to how HR is working as a whole, what role would you say that HR leaders have in ensuring that agentic AI gets adopted across the organization?
Yeah, I mean, where traditionally it would be often that technology would be provided to HR teams and that they would just have to consume it and try to figure it out. I think we're very much in a world now where HR teams, leaders, and it's a responsibility of HR as a whole to take that lead in actually defining where and what of those opportunities and what are, and doing the work to start to break down some of the tasks that are underpinning the use cases. So the key thing is, a very practical one is being very clear on what the use cases are, and in turn, and something we'll talk about is a bit later, is well, what really is that return if you were to invest in those use cases. So I think that's quite a big one, is taking some control, being very clear on the priority and the success criteria of those use cases. So I think that's certainly one thing. The other one, I guess, is a broader one, is that if something is useful and an agent, is within the flow of the work, has a human in the loop at the right and appropriate point, then at which point there's an understanding of how, and an understanding of the organization and your teams. In turn, that will then drive adoption, because it will meet people where they are and satisfy and service them. And equally from that, one of the most key points is actually that feedback loop of, if something isn't working, because we're all human, we're all going through change, we're all trying to learn how we're adopting agentic capability in businesses. So if something isn't working, it's then coming back, getting the feedback loop, getting the data back into your teams in order to say, well, okay, how either can we improve this, what's gone wrong, and getting the data from the agent themselves, because I guess that as part of that flow of a process, then you're seeing at what points the agentic capability is giving you and is realizing the value that you thought it was, but equally where it isn't as well. So there's a couple of things in there, certainly around, to say, build on that ownership and responsibility of the use cases, being clear on the success criteria, and then being very, very clear on getting the feedback loop right on what is working and, importantly, what isn't working. Oh, and actually, real final one is that we've had this perennial debate about working between HR and IT. It's not either or, it's both. It has to be both. We have no choice anymore.
Agree more. Yes. I think what's happening is that the roles of CIOs and chief people officers, CHROs, varies company to company, is getting so enmeshed. It's so overlapping, because on one side you have people workers, human workers, and increasingly now you have a digital workforce. We talked about those 15 years ago, 10 years ago. I think it's finally coming to reality that there will be hundreds, if not thousands, if not tens of thousands of AI agents in every organization. The management of those agents is going to look very similar to management of human workers, employees. And so the role of the CIO is transforming and becoming more and more like, management of onboarding an AI agent, seeing how they're performing. How can we improve that AI agent by giving it more knowledge and more training? And so it looks very similar to how today we think about our own selves, our employees, how we can help them work more. And in the end, it's all about getting more done with less, becoming more efficient. So all innovation has been focused on becoming more efficient, getting more done. And so it's a very interesting time. So no wonder the projections of adoption which in the agentic AI are high. I think the old adage of we overestimate in the short term and we underestimate in the long term. I think that remains to be seen as to what is that long term. At the moment, things are moving at breakneck pace in terms of adoption of AI in general, not just agentic AI, but conversational AI capabilities, generative AI capabilities. So interesting time to be alive.
For sure. And with those with that kind of breakneck pace, I wanted to just take a moment to ask Martin, beyond the quantitative metrics that most enterprises are tracking, things like ROI, through auto resolution rate or increases of customer satisfaction, what would you say are some of those more qualitative indicators that you look for to show that agentic AI is fundamentally changing the organization's HR processes and how they're getting work done?
It's as we see, we're very in the relatively early stages of seeing what the implications are of agents within organizations. But really, it comes down to defining again the roles that different parts of the business are performing or should be performing. So we've talked about HR teams moving up the value chain for a really long time now, and ultimately the technology is not necessarily been there to truly do it, or it's been costly to try and get there, or it's been patchy at best. What we see now is that being clear on, and we talk about the kind of no love activity, which is often the things where they're repetitive, can be mapped and can work through workflow of a form, are the things where actually often HR teams have been predicated on completing those higher value tasks, but often the reality is they've actually moved down the value chain because it's the things that aren't working with which they spend most time doing and are most costly. So one of the qualitative things is that HR can spend more time on actually engaging with people, and equally looking at how to drive the business or support the business and moving forward. Equally looking at managers in, again, some of the types of administrative tasks, looking at a way that they can be, the time to complete can be reduced, but keeping people within the loop is always absolutely paramount to it. And then, to the employee, it's to the point we were talking about the sort of closed loop and what that means in ticket deflection. And it comes back to this point of personalization, is that if it's easier for an employee to complete something, then they're more likely to adopt it. And in turn, then the technology itself will start to actually yield the value with which we've all been talking about for an awful long time. So I think there's a few aspects there, and certainly another thing we're seeing is that even from an external perspective within HR, where you've got candidates that are engaging with businesses, and coming through a recruitment process, then the more seamless that is, the bit better that supports the early retention rates, and at which point it then starts to get to where the value is actually being held. Because we often know that retention rates for certain businesses can be really difficult in those first 90 days if the right environments and experiences are being given. So there's such a big opportunity in order to support the value experience, as opposed to the paper filling and completing your details 300 times in 300 different screens. Being able to do that more seamlessly really helps us from a number of different angles.
Yes. And kind of going into that value experience, Kashif, I'd love to hear your thoughts more on how AI agents kind of impact the overall employee experience, not just through those kinds of, as Martin said, those paper filling tasks, but also more on the benefits side for them individually, whether it's increased productivity or going beyond that.
I think Martin makes a great point about this quantitative versus qualitative. Look, none of us, wake up in the morning and look forward to filling up 300 forms a day, right? Or jumping between 16 different, platforms and systems and applications. We want to get work done. We want to achieve something as humans. We want to feel like we got something done by the end of the day, right? And so what you're seeing on screen, for example, is it's oversimplification of today. If it's taking you days of sending a request, hey, I need some paid leave, family leave, and there's an entire process of that, and there are often more than one managers involved. Often you will see if one person is on leave and in that entire approval process, the process can get stuck for hours and sometimes for days. Agentic AI's approach there can be seamless from a business impact perspective, but to come to a human side of things, the quality of the experience from an employee perspective, that asking for a leave and it just goes through in a few minutes, you're done, because policies are already there. They have already been set. HR systems know who you are, what your role is. You are in the Microsoft Active Directory. We know you've been working there. So why does it have to be 5 different people to approve your request when the policies are pretty clear? Of course, there are special scenarios here and there, but 99% of the time, these AI agents can take care of those requests pretty quickly. The business impact is easy to see. People move on with their work. They don't have to email the manager 6 times. Hey, have you seen my email? And so on and so forth, right? But it's the qualitative side, to Martin's point about, you feel much better, can move on to your work, and you can really focus on getting stuff done. That's what technology is all about. So agentic, we will see more and more about. So I'll give you one example, then we'll move on. The pricing of agentic AI has been extremely complex. In the last 1 year, I've seen everything from pricing over, an agent started a conversation, and if it's complete in 24 hours, then you pay X based on that agent. We are moving towards at Aisera, we decided, look, it has to be based on request. If the request is complete, agent has completed its task. End of story. So it is outcome based. And we have to be that, we have to have that kind of focus on what matters here. What matters here is whether we solved the problem, answered the question, and got that employee or whoever, maybe the manager, to get their job done or not. And that's how pricing should be set up as well, which is a departure from a lot of what we see in enterprise systems today, whether it's seat-based, whether it's how much data you're using, and so on and so forth. So I'm oversimplifying it a little bit, but the approach has to be focused on getting work done with the help of technology, and not the other way around, not focus on technology so much, but focus on humans.
And speaking of those types of use cases and getting work done, these are some of the use cases that Aisera has identified as key to automate and impactful to users. Martin, I'd love to hear from you. Why would you recommend some of these use cases, and what makes them compelling for HR teams to get started with?
The compelling reason is because there's parts of them that really are no love and pieces that can be automated. So they're the things that as humans we've spent an awful long time, that phrase of swivel chair activity where I'm passing one piece of paper to another person behind me. Almost all of these would involve some aspect of that in the past. So whether it's the policy support and where we can point specifically to policy documentation or completing cases that actually really do not necessarily need a human in the loop, or importantly can be passed to a human at the right points. The other aspect is that an agent, as far as we know, doesn't sleep, so therefore there's going to be 24/7 support, right? So there's such a big value in that at whatever time of day or night or wherever you are in the globe, you've got some form of support that you can go to as well. I could go through almost all of these here, but they all involve an aspect of that where there's a repeatable activity. And increasingly, I guess, is where we start to see this, is that it's not only where it's generative, it's not only where we can streamline parts of processes, but it's also looking at how we can move parts of agents working with other agents as well. So starting to really push down on, well, how would I frame and structure my HR team in order to give the best value in order back to the business, and ultimately, the costly parts of any organization is often the person interaction within it, because it's often where you've got the most gaps either in process or parts where where those processes can stall, as we were just talking about. So there's certainly that as a significant aspect to it as well. The other one, I guess, is, as I say, is, and we keep coming back to this idea of the improvement in experience and the fact that it's if you can get to an outcome quicker or that satisfies what you went into the engagement with, you're far more likely to come back and adopt it again. Like that's the way we operate in terms of trying to get to the point of an outcome. So whether it's going through that recruitment process, the onboarding one is, as we all know, is where we joined different organizations over the course of our careers and had to fill in pieces of information multiple times. Well, if again, that type of activity not only streamlines it for the candidate, but also for the recruiter, then for them to be able to get back out and to start supporting other recruiting activity. Final one I'll just talk about, I guess, throughout this is which we talked already about, policy and case management and support desk ticket support, which payroll and some of the benefits pieces are. But being able to, I guess, get that to the final points around the communication and the broadcast point, where there's different ways that we can start to look at agents as part of our communications activity, that they become part of that team that can help to craft and personalize and actually use the data that we've got to then see how we can start to use multiple agents across a process in order to make sure that if there's feedback coming in, that we've got ability to act on that. We can actually start to use that data in a much more proactive way, to send notifications, to nudge people in ways in order to get the support that they need. So again, it ultimately does come back to the experience aspect, but in a much more personalized way. And again, if we adopt it, it's fulfilling a significant part of that return on investment.
Amazing. Thank you. This has been a really great discussion. Next slide, please. Kashif, I'd love to get into a real world example to just kind of round this all out and bring it together. Could you tell us about one of your customers and how they've successfully deployed Agentic AI in their HR team?
Yes, indeed. Workday, of course, for those of you, very few of you who have never heard of Workday, is pretty much the world's largest HR software provider. They serve about 10,000 organizations, enterprises around the globe, $8 billion transactions done annually, 18,000 employees of their own. They happen to be one of Aisera's customers. And so this is a unique scenario. Workday is an HR software provider, and they use technology from Aisera to solve their own HR issues. And so that tells you that specialization is important, first of all. Workday specializes in HR software, not in AI. And so they went out, they ran an entire pilot program and chose Aisera as the AI innovations, AI technology provider to Workday. We worked very closely with Ronnie Johnson, their Chief Information Officer. And the way she puts it, she was recently at one of our panel discussions, is that the way her office approached in selection of vendors, Agentic AI in this case, or AI in general, and also to see how they adopt AI. So two different things: a selection of vendors and then adoption of AI. Selection of vendors, they have pretty clear criteria. They wanted business impact, of course. And so 3 areas, of course, revenue impact, number 1. Cost reduction, huge for any organization. The biggest promise that AI continues to make today is that there will be cost reductions. But there was a recent MIT study that came out that said over 95% of AI projects fail. Most people read that heading. What they did not see was the flip side of that. 67%, a full 67% and increasing number of projects where an organization like Workday, instead of building it themselves, went to a subject matter expert, went to a specialized AI company like Aisera and others, 67% of the time, it was successful. Now, those are two different things, and we can have a worldview about all of these things. Yes, projects fail, but what's lost in the translation and detail there is that those failed projects are often tries internally of a company that is not a subject matter expert in AI. And instead, when they start working with subject matter experts like Aisera, the success rate continues to grow. Now, coming back to Workday, that was Workday's approach. Instead of saying, hey, we are Workday, we have thousands of people in our IT, why don't we build it ourselves? Rani and her team decided they'll go out, they'll find a vendor that meets their criteria and start deploying. And the results have been pretty fantastic. They launched what they call Workmate Companion. That's an assistant, that's an agent, that's actually an Aisera agent that has been fully formed for Workday themselves. And it is an IT agent, it is an HR agent, and they have a separate agent for their CX, their customer support services. The results have been pretty fantastic. Millions of dollars in cost savings. They're averaging over $1 million in cost savings every year. 86% resolution rate. What does that mean? That means the agent will deflect 86% or more of requests coming into an HR person. And so again, back to my example about I need family leave or something like that, that is a request. An AI agent can take that request, look at the policies, solve that request, answer my questions, and it never gets to a human. That means 86% of the time, your service desk is not getting overloaded. It's not getting those requests. So huge cost savings, huge time savings, much better experience for the employee. And that's where it manifests. 80% improved CSAT and ESAT. So customer support as well as employee experiences, they all go up. Perhaps the last thing to say about is what Rani and her team focused on was a unified employee experience. They did not go with, separate things for separate organizations. Of course, customer support outward facing is slightly different from employee support inward facing. But for all of their employees across IT, HR, facilities, legal, and so forth, it's a unified experience built on top of Aisera's Agentic AI platform. Many, many agents running, but to employees, they manifest as a single agent that answers all of their questions. Of course, it has taken its time. It has been a multi-year effort. They started small and then they expanded from there. And so pretty fantastic experience. The impact and feasibility. Those are the two things her organization focused on. They went very methodically about it. They chose and ran pilots with vendors, chose a vendor, and then really put together KPIs that manifested whether the project were a success or not. So we are very proud of supporting the world's largest HR organization.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kashif. With that, I'd love to head into our live Q&A portion of today's session. To the audience, please type your questions in the chat and we'll be happy to answer them.
So yeah, I see one question that came in. The question, this is probably good for you, Martin. As AI agents take on more repetitive HR tasks, how do you see the role of HR professionals evolving? What new opportunities does this create for people teams?
It's one of the $64 million questions we've got at the moment as to what's the impact on jobs and job roles. So firstly, I think it's important to understand what your teams actually do. Because often within those teams, there's the tasks that we perceive that are being completed and we don't necessarily track, that often consume the most amount of time, but of the ones that then have the most limited value. So that's almost the first thing, is to actually get down to, and what we're seeing, I guess, is, over the past probably 5 to 10 years, we've had such a big emphasis on skills, which are still important because we're going to be going through a period of reskilling as we sort of feel the impacts of AI entering the workplace on an ever increasing basis. But the counter to that, what we see is almost the supply side of is well, what are the tasks that we're completing that require those skills in order to ensure that you get the outcomes that you want to achieve? So again, going back to understanding what your teams are doing. But more generally, I think, look, there's a lot of scary news out there around AI taking over roles and whatnot. We've been through these cycles before, with technology coming in and reshaping how jobs work, reshaping how roles work. So we've talked an awful lot about, as I've mentioned during the past hours. One of the points was that we've always seen the HR teams as a real aspiration to move up the value chain in order to better support the business. Well, AI will give you more information at your fingertips. If the right data is there and it's been deployed in the right way, you will have that data there in order to facilitate better questions. You will also potentially have the better or more time to complete the things that would then go and then enable us as humans, which, again, one of the key things you'll see quite often is that we talk about some of those key human skills, and that's what we will have to focus on. So like critical thinking, so having some of those conversations with your colleagues and interrogating and using the data and the output from be it agentic capability or other forms of AI, in order to then facilitate those more valued conversations. And those conversations will in turn do two things. They will support better business value, so you can support the ambitions of the business. And then secondly, we can actually support our people better, which we've been wanting to do for an awful long time, but often get really slowed down by, as we say, those no-love tasks that really don't necessarily add value.
Thank you for that. There's one more here. Kashif, this is probably good for you to answer. What are some realistic milestones HR teams can target in the first 90 days of deploying agentic AI to show value? I know we reviewed some use cases. Are those realistically the first 90 days? What are some of the low-hanging fruit?
So 2 phases of each and every one of these. Let's call it 3 phases. First, you select the technology that you want to use. Before you ever get into that, as a buyer, I mentioned Ronnie Johnson at Workday, they had a very clear plan. They knew that AI is great for them. The Workday is going through an entire AI transformation process. So choosing your use cases are important. Okay. I promise I'll answer the question of 90 days. But once you have chosen those, and you have chosen your technology, the setting of KPIs is pretty critical in terms of there are certain use cases that are long-term use cases that require complex integration with systems that have been sitting there for decades, including Workday's own environment, right? And so if we take implementation, integration, getting everything operational aside, which in itself is a task, it could take a couple of weeks, it could take a couple of months based on how complex your enterprise infrastructure is. Once you're past that, 90-day timeline is actually a great timeline to see how your agents are integrating with your systems and how many requests that they are actually addressing and answering. Now, don't expect 80-90% resolution rate, auto resolution rate right out of the box. But that's where that learning loop comes in. The more an agent learns, the faster it gets next time in answering a certain query. There's always the Pareto principle. 80% of the queries are coming from 20% of the core issues. And so if you target your agents on those 80% of the queries, the low-hanging fruit of where is the biggest bang for the buck, you can achieve a lot in the first 90 days. So the expectation should be once the systems have been integrated, and that can take a while, lowest hanging fruit use case, test the technology with that, and set a very clear KPI. For example, in the first 90 days, I would like this high repetitive question to be resolved 100 times with 100% accuracy or 99% accuracy. Those are the kind of KPIs that really help you understand whether your selected vendor can do that, whether the integrated systems are working well or not. So it's a good timeline. Don't try to boil the ocean. Don't try to resolve everything in 90 days. Give the system some time, but the first 90 days are critical to evaluate your selected technology and your chosen use case in terms of maybe you need to switch over the use case after 90 days and say, okay, I want to try something else. So it depends on the environment, depends on the criticality of use cases, but 90 days is a good amount of time to actually deliver results.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Looks like we have time for one more question. How do we make sure AI agents enhance and not replace the human connection employees expect?
Look, all technology is there since the wheel was invented to help us get work done better, faster, cheaper, so we can live our lives better. That process has not stopped. It probably will never stop, right? Like Martin touched on it. It's the age-old, it's very age-old question, but it's very urgent now. It's like, what will happen to my job that I do today? I think the way to think about it is, do we want to continue to do things that are not necessary for us, that can be easily automated out, if you will, so that we can do higher value work? Now, it's easier to say higher value work. That definition changes from role to role, department to department, even company to company. We have a customer, NNS, that builds, or the only company that builds nuclear submarines in the United States. Alongside Rani, their head of IT, their CIO, was telling their process of how they went through selecting technology providers like Aisera, were the use cases they use. And they were extremely deliberate and extremely slow in selecting technology and use cases. Why? Because it was life and death question. Sailors underwater in a submarine, when technology is applied to that, is a completely different scenario when it's applied to an HR environment in a technology company, for example, right? And so it's entirely dependent on what your role is, how technology can help you improve your performance, but also what you feel about your job. If it is a repetitive, mundane task, nobody feels great about that. And so if we can automate that out so you can do more fruitful, more better work, better for yourself, better for community, better for humanity, that definition changes. So a lot has been written and said about that. A lot is being discovered into how these AI systems can come in, help us do our jobs better without entirely appending the systems that are out there. Those are up in the air. Those are big questions that are getting resolved. But if we focus on technology helping us do our jobs better so that we can spend more time with our families, or maybe do more fun stuff in our lives, not a bad equation, I think.
Yep, I definitely agree with that. Well, Francis, I'll let you close this out here.
Awesome. Thanks so much. So just to wrap up the webinar, thanks so much for joining us today, Martin and Kashif, and also thank you to Joanna. Thanks everyone for attending as well. If you're interested in learning more, you can scan the QR code to schedule a demo. With that, I'll end the webinar. Have a great rest of your day.